There's something magnetic about arrogance, not because it's admirable, but because it demands attention. An arrogant person thrives on control. They speak louder, interrupt faster, and often mistake dominance for wisdom. But here's the truth: arrogance isn't confidence, it's fear dressed in pride. And when you understand that, you no longer need to fight it, you learn to disarm it. Arrogance often walks into the room wearing the mask of confidence. It talks louder, interrupts quicker, and dominates conversations as if control equals strength. But beneath that polished surface lies something fragile: fear. Arrogant people fear being unseen, unheard, or unimportant. They build walls of superiority because somewhere deep inside they doubt their own worth. It's easier to appear powerful than to admit vulnerability. But here's the truth: real confidence doesn't need to prove anything, it simply is. Um, when you understand this, you stop reacting to arrogance as an attack. You start seeing it as a defense. And that shift changes everything. You no longer feel the need to fight back or outshines them. Instead, you respond with calm clarity. You recognize that someone's loud ego is really a quiet cry for validation. You know, this awareness, you stop letting arrogance provoke you, and you begin to lead with grounded strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Confidence is built on self awareness, arrogance is built on fear. And once you can tell the difference, you'll never confuse the two again. When faced with arrogance, our first instinct is often to defend ourselves, to prove we're right, speak louder, to reclaim control. But here's the truth: confrontation feeds arrogance. It gives the other person exactly what they crave: attention, reaction, and validation for their behavior. Calm authority, however, does something extraordinary. It breaks the pattern. When you stay composed, when your voice remains steady and your eyes unwavering, you communicate a message far more powerful than any argument could. You're not playing their game. Calm authority isn't silence out of fear, it's silence born from strength. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth and doesn't need to perform to prove it. It's saying, with your presence, you can raise your tone, but you won't shake my peace. Think of it like emotional aikido. You redirect their aggression instead of absorbing it. The arrogant person expects chaos, but your calmness confuses them. Your refusal to react steals their control. You shift the power dynamic from reaction to self-possession. And in that moment, you remind both of you who truly holds the power, not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who stays grounded when the storm hits. That's what real strength looks like: not loud, not defensive, just quietly certain. Arrogant people often believe that volume equals power, that whoever speaks the loudest wins the room. But real power doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to prove, persuade, or perform. Real power lives in composure, in truth delivered without tension. When you speak from truth, not ego, your words carry weight. They don't echo to be heard. They resonate because they come from clarity, not chaos. The arrogant thrive on emotional noise. They want to pull you into their storm. But when you speak with measured calm, you remind them that storms lose their power against still waters. A composed truth isn't about softness, it's about precision. It's saying what's real without hostility. It's standing tall in your integrity, even when provoked, because truth doesn't need decoration. It stands on its own. And here's what's powerful: when you choose composed truth over loud defense, you lead by example. You show others that strength isn't in dominance, it's in self-control. The most powerful person in any room isn't the one who wins the argument. It's the one who remains aligned with their truth, no matter how loud the noise becomes. So the next time arrogance tries to drown you out, remember, the quiet truth spoken with integrity can silence 100 empty words. When dealing with arrogance, silence becomes your greatest strategy, not as a weapon, but as wisdom. Arrogant people crave reaction. They feed off your defensiveness, your explanations, your need to be understood. But silence denies them that feast. It communicates something powerful. You don't owe your energy to chaos. Emotional maturity isn't about having the perfect comeback. It's about knowing when not to engage. Sometimes the most powerful response is a pause, a calm breath, a knowing look, or a short phrase that ends the cycle. Actual phrases like "I see," "understood," or "that's your opinion" may sound simple, but they carry weight because they come from control, not submission. They don't invite debate, they close the door to it. They say, "I've heard you, but I won't be dragged into a contest of egos." Silence disarms arrogance because it reveals who's actually in control. The person who stays composed holds the higher ground. It's not weakness, it's restraint. It's choosing dignity over reaction. When you no longer need to explain your worth, you become untouchable. Silence is not the absence of words, it's the presence of peace. And in the presence of peace, arrogance always loses its power. It's easy to mistake strength for aggression or boundaries for coldness. But when you use these phrases to handle arrogance, the goal isn't to win, it's to stay whole. These words are not verbal punches meant to humble someone else. They're shields that protect your peace without harming your integrity. A person rooted in maturity understands this. Power used without compassion becomes cruelty. That's why these phrases must come from a centered place, not from revenge or pride. When you say, "You might be right," or "let's move on," you're not trying to embarrass the other person. You're simply saying, "I choose peace over performance." Boundaries wrapped in grace are calm, clear, and kind. They don't need explanation. They create emotional distance without hostility. They signal to others, "I respect myself enough to not stay in toxic energy, and I respect you enough not to fight you for control." That's emotional intelligence in action, protecting your space while maintaining your compassion. Because the moment you start fighting arrogance with arrogance, you lose the very thing that makes you powerful, your inner balance. So when you speak these phrases, do it with stillness in your heart. Let your tone be soft but certain. Let your words carry dignity, not disdain. Remember, grace doesn't mean surrender. It means strength wrapped in kindness. And that's the kind of strength that changes every conversation. One of the most misunderstood truths about dealing with arrogance is this: you can feel for someone without letting them control you. Empathy doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or agreeing with every word. Instead, it's the ability to understand where someone is coming from while remaining fully rooted in your own self-respect. Arrogant people often assume that empathy is weakness. They believe that when you listen or acknowledge them, you are yielding power. But the opposite is true. Empathy, when paired with boundaries, is a demonstration of courage and emotional intelligence. It's saying, "I see you. I understand your fears and motivations, but I will not let them dictate my peace." This kind of empathy disarms arrogance because it humanizes the other person without letting them dominate you. It reminds them subtly, without confrontation, that your strength is not measured by who shouts the loudest, but by who holds their center in the storm. When you master this, conversations with arrogant people shift. They may still speak loudly or attempt to intimidate, but you no longer react in fear or defensiveness. Instead, you engage from a place of grounded understanding, calm, strong, and unwavering. True emotional strength lies here in seeing someone's flaws and fears without letting them compromise your values, your dignity, or your peace. Empathy without submission doesn't just disarm arrogance, it transforms your presence into something unshakable and magnetic. Yeah, I know it's tempting when faced with arrogance to match it, to raise your voice, to show them you're just as strong, just as unyielding. But mirroring arrogance only fuels the fire. It escalates tension, drains your energy, and keeps you trapped in someone else's ego. True wisdom lies in neutralization, not retaliation. To neutralize arrogance, you remain composed, measured, and present. You do not absorb their aggression and you do not reflect it back. Instead, you respond in a way that disarms the tension and maintains your dignity. Neutralization is subtle but powerful. It's in the calm nod, the measured phrase, the steady gaze that says, "Your words do not control me." It's the difference between participating in chaos and standing above it. Arrogant individuals are often shocked when they encounter someone who won't rise to their provocation. And in that moment, their dominance begins to fade. A wise person understands that controlling the conversation isn't about overpowering the other person, it's about controlling themselves. By refusing to mirror arrogance, you reclaim your space, your energy, and your peace. You become untouchable in the face of ego because your strength doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from centeredness. When you neutralize rather than mirror arrogance, you don't just survive the encounter, you transform it. You show that true authority isn't loud or aggressive, it's calm, intentional, and unshakable. When arrogance challenges us, our instinct is often to defend, explain, or argue to prove that we are right. But self-respect doesn't live in proving anything to anyone. It lives in staying centered, calm, and aligned with your values, no matter the noise around you. Staying centered means you don't allow someone else's ego to dictate your emotions. It means recognizing that your worth isn't tied to winning arguments or earning validation from people who thrive on control. The more you insist on proving yourself to an arrogant person, the more power you hand over to them. Self-respect is quiet but unwavering. It's the confidence to say, I don't need to fight to be seen, and I don't need to shout to be heard. It's the inner steadiness that allows you to respond with dignity rather than reaction. When you stay centered, arrogance loses its grip. The loudness, the condescension, the attempts to provoke, they no longer matter. Your peace becomes your authority, your calm becomes your strength, and your sense of self becomes unshakable. In essence, self-respect is not about proving that you're right. It's about proving that your inner life cannot be rattled. It's about showing that your center is stronger than any ego that tries to shake it. And when you embrace this truth, you disarm arrogance effortlessly because it no longer has a target to hit. Yelian, when arrogance enters the room, many people instinctively try to win, to outsmart, outshout, or overpower the other person. But here's the deeper truth. Dominance is fleeting. Control is temporary. No matter how loud or aggressive someone becomes, the moment passes. What lasts is dignity. Choosing peace over dominance is the ultimate act of strength. It's saying, I don't need to prove anything to you. My value is not tied to your approval or your ego. When you operate from this place, arrogance loses its power because it thrives on conflict, not calm. Dignity isn't about submission or silence. It's about intentional presence. It's about holding yourself with grace, even in the face of provocation. It's about responding in ways that reflect your character, not the other person's flaws. Every phrase you speak, every pause you take becomes a testament to your self-respect. When your goal is peace, you rise above the ego-driven chaos. Arrogant behavior becomes almost irrelevant because it cannot penetrate someone who values serenity over argument. Dignity, unlike dominance, is permanent. It leaves a lasting impression, builds respect, and transforms interactions, not through force, but through unwavering presence. Ultimately, choosing peace over dominance is not surrender. It is mastery. It is the quiet, undeniable power that disarms arrogance every time, leaving you unshaken, respected, and centered. One of the biggest traps in dealing with arrogance is believing that confidence comes from outshining someone else. Many think that to show strength, they must correct, argue, or dominate. But true confidence is quieter. It is trusting your own judgment, knowing your worth, and remaining grounded regardless of what anyone else says. When you respond from self trust rather than the need to prove, you neutralize arrogance effortlessly. You no longer react to provocation because your sense of value isn't dependent on external validation. Arrogant people thrive on shaking others, but when you are anchored in your confidence, their efforts bounce off you. Confidence in this sense is invisible yet undeniable. It doesn't boast, it doesn't compete, and it doesn't demand attention. Instead, it radiates stability, self possession, and inner power. Every calm word, every measured pause, every thoughtful phrase communicates strength far more than shouting ever could. Ultimately, confidence isn't about proving others wrong, it's about trusting yourself enough to remain centered, composed, and unshaken in the face of arrogance. And when you do, you don't just survive the encounter, you transform it, leaving dignity and self respect as your signature. Arrogant people often speak to dominate, not to communicate. They assume that the louder they are, the more authority they wield. But one of the most underestimated tools in disarming arrogance is listening, truly listening. Listening shows restraint, patience, and understanding. It communicates, I am fully present, but I am not controlled by your ego. While they are busy projecting, you gain clarity and perspective. You understand not only what they are saying, but why they feel compelled to say it.